Okay, so today's program is Creating Freezer Meals by Katrin Finch, and she's our MSU Extension Cascade County Extension agent. Every day at noon, we have a different webinar, and so today is on creating freezer meals. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and pass it over to Katrin. Can't quite hear you. I think you're on mute. And go ahead and take that presenter ball. Katrin, are you there? Oh, your computer froze. So did mine. Okay. Sorry for those who, it seems like everybody's on the internet and it seems like computers are having glitches frequently with webinars. So Katrin will be joining us shortly. I'm going to pass that presenter ball to you, Katrin, and so you can get started. While we wait for Katrin's computer to get going again, how about we use the chat box? It's over on the right-hand side. What's one thing that you hope to learn today about this class? All right, it looks like a few people have given us some ideas of, oh, and Katrin looks like she's back. There she is. You, you look like you're currently on mute, so let me take you off, Katrin. Are you there?
I am. I'm trying to see. Okay. So
There you are.
make sure I can share my PowerPoint.
Okay, so you'll need to take that presenter ball if you
Okay.
haven't already. Go.
It's not letting me share PowerPoint.
Okay. Um, There's that box down at the center with the share content.
I had to apparently give my computer access.
That looks great. Thank you.
Okay. Wow. It's always eventful when presenting online. So thank you everyone for bearing with us, or me rather. So as Caitlin mentioned, my name is Katrin Finch, and I am the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent for MSU Extension in Cascade County. I have done a couple different freezer meal classes, never one online, so this is new. So hopefully this is helpful to you and your family or your household. Okay, so freezer meals can be incredibly intimidating. So where do you start? That's always the question. One thing that I do frequently, and I know Caitlin and I have talked about this as well, is to cook once and eat twice. So this is a great place to start, especially if you are new at making freezer meals. So it's easy to make a double batch of something. You're already making that food anyway, so make twice as much, and then you can put the other half of that in the freezer. Make a plan. If you are going to do freezer meals, it's very helpful to make a plan, whether that's through meal planning or just having a general idea. It can be as detailed or kind of free-flowing as you want, but having a plan is extremely helpful. In our household, we just recently started doing meal planning, and it has helped so much, not only just having an idea of what to eat, but also giving us an idea of what we're spending on food, reducing our food waste, which is huge. And then also it's saved us quite a bit of money over the long run. Instead of those quick trips to the store to buy one or two things, where you end up putting 6 or 7 other things in your cart that you don't necessarily need. So freezer meals are a great way to help you make a plan. And especially in those times that we're really busy, or maybe we're tight on the budget, having a freezer meal gives you that opportunity to have a meal that's ready, easy to throw on the table in a short amount of time. So when you're thinking about freezer meals and getting ready to make them, it's also important to think about how are you going to cook the meal? Are you going to use the stovetop to cook it, kind of like a skillet? Are you going to use the electric pressure cooker, the oven, or a crock pot? There are a lot of different ways to cook things, but having an idea of what tools you have in your kind of arsenal of kitchen gadgets gives you more opportunity to, or helps you make a better plan for what types of freezer meals you will be making. And then how much time is it going to take to cook those freezer meals? So do you need to pull that dish out a day before so it can defrost, or can you cook it straight from the freezer? And that can also have to do with the types of pans you're using. And then who's going to be cooking the meal? Is it going to be an adult in the household? Is it going to be one of the kids, whether it's an older kid or a younger kid? Is it something they can pull out and just put in the oven, kind of like a freezer pizza? Or is it something that maybe requires a little bit more expertise? So thinking about all those different things when you're preparing those freezer meals can be helpful. Sometimes there are people in the household that love to cook and they feel comfortable doing almost anything. But then there are also those people that don't like to cook or maybe don't feel as comfortable. So having something that they can take straight from the freezer and put it in the oven at 350 and let it cook for an hour can be easy for those people. Okay, so there are a lot of different benefits to freezer meals. So one of those benefits is having a homemade meal. It's always nice to have a fresh homemade meal put on the table. Money, we talked about this a little bit when I was talking about meal planning. So money it's really helpful to be able to penny pinch on that grocery bill. And one of the examples I have today, will be a way of saving money, but also saving that produce. So time is another one. We find ourselves pressed for time constantly. At the moment, we might have a little bit more time on our hands, which gives us a good opportunity to make a plan for freezer meals and get those ready for when things do kind of resume and life gets crazy and hectic. Nutrition. Nutrition is preserved through freezing. So when you freeze your foods, they are not going through that process of becoming unsafe or moldy. So saving that nutrition is a good way, or putting them in the freezer is a good way to save that nutrition. It's also easier to make those healthy meals and put them in the freezer for when things are chaotic and or busy and you want to just stop and grab fast food on the way home. You know that you have a freezer meal that's ready to go that can be done in 30 minutes or less, depending on the item you have. Freezer meals are a great way to shop the grocery store deals. So if there's a sale on something, whether it's a produce or a meat product or just one of your favorite items, be sure to recipes that use those particular ingredients. Planning and working together. Planning and working together as a household is always a good thing to do. So you can plan meals together. Sometimes it's fun to challenge your family or your household to pull out the grocery store deals, plan a meal menu, but they have to use at least one or two of those grocery store deals in their ingredient list. Sharing the duties. We talked a little bit about this too. Who's going to be cooking the meal? But sharing the duties also can come down to who's going to go grocery shopping, who's going to help prep those meals. You can do kind of an assembly line if you've got a couple people in the household. It makes things go really fast, and you can put away between 10 and 20 meals in an hour to 2 hours, which is really helpful. And then my favorite benefit is always to share with friends. So having a freezer meal is always helpful for you, or it is for me at least, but being able to share a freezer meal with somebody else can feel really good. Nothing is better than receiving a gift from someone, but receiving a gift of food that makes it so you don't have to slave away in the kitchen is very helpful. So whether you're going through a time of crisis or you're having a celebration and somebody is able to bring over that freezer meal that you could just throw in the oven and have it ready to go is super helpful. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about food safety throughout this whole thing. So it is important to clean and sanitize all of your work areas. I've cleaned and sanitized my prep area that I'm going to use today. So anything that touches food should be cleaned and sanitized. So the cookie sheet, I've got a stainless steel bowl over here, any cutting boards, any knives, anything that touches food. Cooking and cooling. So there are a lot of different things to know about food safety, and this isn't a food safety class, but if you have more questions, you can always reach out to your local extension agent. But making sure that you're cooking food to the proper internal temperature, and then once it's cooked, making sure that you cool it properly. So today we are going to be blanching some broccoli, and so I've used an ice bath as a method of cooling. An ice bath is simply a bowl or a tray of water with some ice in it, which helps bring the temperature of that food down. Another great way to do it, to cool your food, is using a cooling rack or like a cookie rack that you put your cookies on as they cool. That's my favorite way to bake bacon, and then you can just let that bacon grease drip to the bottom, but your bacon also is able to cool faster. And for freezing meals, that is essential. So labeling is really important. We talked about sharing the duties of who might be who might be helping cook these meals. So it's super important to have the name of the product so we don't have to play the guessing game. Make sure you put the date on the product. This is to make sure that you understand when it was made and how long, so if you take it out of the freezer, how long it is safe in the refrigerator. So always mark that date when you take it out of the freezer as well. The number of servings, this is helpful, especially when you're going to share with friends. And then reheating and cooking instructions. This is, again, sharing those duties of cooking is really important. So making sure that you know exactly what it is you're supposed to do. It's important that you get rid of all of the air in your product to prevent freezer burn, which means I put saran wrap down first and then a layer of tin foil. If I did not mention there was saran wrap underneath the tin foil, one might throw that into the oven and now you have saran wrap in your meal. So it's really important that you label those reheating and cooking instructions. Thawing meals, if you do need to thaw a meal, that also should be noted in the label. Depending on the dish that the meal is in, this is really kind of a deciding factor. So if you have a glass casserole dish that you're using, maybe it can't go straight from the freezer at 0 degrees to an oven of 375 or 400 degrees. It will crack from temperature shock. So it's important that you put that glass dish in the refrigerator the day before so it can come up to temperature of about 40 degrees, and then you can put it in the oven. So will it last? What things can we freeze? How long will it last? This is a general list. This is a list from the USDA. Very, like I said, very general. There's nothing super specific in here about what exactly freezer meals will last. But your freezer should be at 0 degrees, and the length of time that is listed on the right-hand side, the months, that is for the quality of the product. The food will remain safe. It just might get freezer burnt. The colors may change. It might not be as delicious or flavorful. Some of those foods, depending on how long they've been in there, they can take on other flavors. For any of you that are food preservers or canners, sometimes like pasta sauce is one that I think of. Depending on how long something has been in storage, some of those flavors start to change. So it's still considered safe, but it just might not taste as delicious. So meats typically last between 3 to 4 months. Soups and stews, this is one of my favorite ways to do freezer meals, is taking a soup or a broth and just putting it in the freezer for later. So those will last about 3 months. So there are also a lot of other things that we can freeze, not just the meat that we typically see. So vegetables and vegetable scraps. So vegetables, I'm going to demonstrate that today. We're going to do some broccoli, and then vegetable scraps. So if any of you are like vegetable broth lovers, this is a great way to use that whole plant of that vegetable, and you can save those vegetable scraps. Just put them in a gallon bag in the freezer, and then once that bag gets full, you can fill a saucepan with water, let it boil or simmer for a couple hours, and then you've got fresh vegetable broth. And it's wonderful to cook with. And some other easy things to freeze: fresh pasta. If you like to make pasta, maybe we'll have to do a pasta class. Pasta sauce. I also made some pasta sauce today, so I'll show you a trick to help get that pasta sauce into a plastic bag without making a mess. Nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds have oils in them that will go rancid, and so putting them in the freezer can help delay that process of them going rancid. Flours, nut flours, wheat flours, those are great to put in the freezer, especially if you don't use them that often. Bread flours are another one. And then breads and quick breads, those are a great thing to put in the freezer. You can make them ahead of time, whether it's rolls or banana bread, whatever it may be. But it's always nice to have a fresh homemade loaf of bread that you can pull right out of the freezer. Sweet treats. I don't know if you've ever had cookies straight from the freezer, but they're one of my favorites. So you can always put those in the freezer. They will last for what feels like forever. But whenever you need that sweet treat, you can reach into the freezer and grab a cookie. And then uncooked dough. So pizza dough, pie dough, cookie dough, cake batter. Those are also great things that you can put in your freezer. I know they're not meals, but they are nice to have on hand, so you can throw together a quick meal. So in our family, we do pizzas on Friday night, and I grew up making pizza homemade. So having pizza dough in the freezer makes my life much easier, especially with a little one. So we can throw that together. We also often use the pasta sauce that I make homemade. And then we just put some toppings and some cheese on it, and dinner is ready in 30 minutes or less. So there are foods that don't freeze as well. They often become soggy, watery, or separate. So this is what seems like a long list. But cabbage, celery, and cucumbers and lettuce, those are high in water content. So they do those, because of the water, it bursts the cells of the vegetable, which means that they get soggy and watery, similar to when you cook them. Radishes, parsley, baked or boiled potatoes, cooked egg whites. You can freeze eggs. I'm not an expert on freezing eggs, but I do know that you can freeze them. You just have to freeze them outside of the shell. So one popular way to do that is to break the eggs into a muffin tin and then freeze that muffin tin with the eggs in them. And then you can pull those out and put them in a Ziploc bag. Creams, milks, sour cream, mayonnaise, those things all tend to separate. They're still considered safe to eat. However, the flavor or the texture and the taste just aren't quite the same. So I wouldn't recommend freezing those, but in a pinch, I suppose if you had to, you could. And fried foods. Fried foods are not always the best. It's hard to crisp them back up. I would be curious to experiment with an air fryer to see what that might look like. I know that's kind of a new kitchen gadget that I personally haven't had a chance to play with, but might be a way to freeze those fried foods. So tips and tricks, I think my slides may be out of order here, I'm not sure. But tips and tricks, I think the biggest one, and I mentioned this before, is to cook once and eat twice. So whether you have leftovers or you are able to make enough to put away in the freezer and then also eat that dish, it's really the easiest way to get started with freezer meals. So maybe try that first, and then if you decide you really do like the ease of those freezer meals, you can start to make a freezer meal plan. And you can incorporate those freezer meals into your weekly meal plan once or twice a week and really make life much more simple. Always use the first in, first out method. So this is kind of twofold. So when you are freezing a dish, it's important that you put that dish. So if I made a meal today, I would want to put that meal in the back of the freezer. And the meals that I made last week, I would want to pull those forward and use those meals first. This is just to help you keep those meals fresh so they don't get stuck in the back of the freezer or at the bottom of the freezer and they're freezer burnt and now you've wasted all of that food. So really, to reduce food waste, you use that first in, first out method. It's also important to keep in mind when you have a dish that you've made and you were going to use it as leftovers, and then you decide that you're going to put it in the freezer 3 days later, it's important that you mark that it's only safe for 3 days. And that gets into a whole food safety thing, but really it's important that you only have that food in the refrigerator after it's been frozen and unthawed for a very short amount of time. And it really depends on all of the logistics of what ingredients were in the product, when the product went into the freezer, and when it came out. So if you have questions about that, please call. It's just from a food safety perspective, it's important to keep that in mind. Another way is to freeze individual ingredients. So some things that I've frozen in the past, I love to freeze grapes. Those are a great way to save them. I never go through them fast enough. And then they're nice for just a nice cool snack in the summer, a frozen grape. Some other things, like I said, we're going to do broccoli today. I had broccoli that was sitting in my refrigerator. It was about to go bad, and we have not gotten to the meal of making beef and broccoli yet, which was on our meal plan last week. So I'm going to prepare the broccoli. We like to eat broccoli just as a steamed vegetable in our household. So I'm going to do a tray pack with the broccoli, and then I will be able to save that and we can have it for dinner, whether it's for the beef and broccoli dish or just as a side later this week. Freeze as flat as possible. So when you have your product, and you can see in this picture, these are all flat. So when you are getting ready to freeze your product, you want to lay it flat. And then once it's frozen, you can turn it upright, and then you have almost a bookcase of all of your freezer meals. So it makes it easier to find, but it also saves a lot of space instead of being a big lump at the bottom of the bag. And I did skip a point here. So making multiple meals in one day. I talked about that when we do things together or work as a team, share the duties. Making multiple meals in one day is a great way to stock your freezer. So I've gotten together with friends in the past, and we've made probably 30 meals total, but between 8 and 10 meals per person that we were able to take home. But it only took us about 3 hours to get all of those meals done. So we had people chopping, we had people watching the stove for boiling things, we had people mixing and putting together those dishes. So it's really helpful. It's also very fun. I know the social aspect can be challenging at the moment, but maybe get together on a webinar or web-based chat that you can prepare together but apart. Leaving space between packages when they're freezing them, or when you're freezing, that's to help the air circulate so they can freeze faster. And then organizing. Organizing your meals and storing them is really important. So helpful for anybody that comes in and says, oh my gosh, I don't know what we're going to do for dinner. So having a plan, have a meal plan that you can refer to, even just having a list of the freezer meals that are available on the outside of your freezer. Separate and store your meals by protein. This is one way that I have seen this done. The other way, in a deep freeze, where you've got to dig to the bottom, you can use reusable shopping bags to help separate those maybe proteins. So if you've got all your beef dishes in one and all of your chicken dishes in another bag, you can pull all of those chicken bags or the chicken dishes out and get to the bottom of the freezer. Just some tips and tricks. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my video, I think. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to talk about a tray pack, and then also talk about just a quick tip or trick rather for the pasta sauce to get it into a bag without making a mess. I think you guys can still see. Okay, so we will do the tray pack of the broccoli first. So first I blanched the broccoli. So to do this, I chopped up the broccoli into small, just typical bite-sized pieces. This one's a little small, but bite-sized pieces that you would typically find in a stir-fry type dish. And I put the broccoli into boiling water. So about 3 minutes in boiling water, and then I put it into an ice bath. So I have a stainless steel bowl. And then I put ice in the bottom, and I took the broccoli in my strainer from the boiling water and put it into this bowl with ice. And then I was able to put cold water on top to let the broccoli stop cooking, which stops the enzymes from making the food bad. So when I take this broccoli, I'm going to put it onto the tray and I'm going to spread it out evenly, but so none of the broccoli is touching each other. This is for an important reason. If any of you have had a bag of frozen berries and you left them out on the counter, maybe you were making a smoothie, they got left on the counter and they started to melt and you thought, oh gosh darn it, I forgot to put that back in the freezer. So you quick throw it in the freezer and now you have one large berry as opposed to all of your separate berries. I cannot tell you how many times I have done this myself. So in an effort to avoid that, I'm going to spread the broccoli all over the tray so that none of it is touching. So this helps keep those pieces of broccoli individual. And then once they get partially frozen, so I'll put it in the freezer for probably about 30 minutes. But once they're partially frozen, then I will be able to take them out and put them into a Ziploc bag and have broccoli that can be steamed or thrown in the microwave with a little bit of water and a lid on top so they can steam and we can use them for dinner. So your tray will look something like, I know this isn't super exciting for you guys, but this is a neat trick that I use. I use it a lot for the produce that we have that is about to go bad. And for anybody that is maybe starting a victory garden and you are anticipating lots of produce, this is a great way to save your produce before it goes bad. So if you can see, I've got the broccoli just kind of spread out here, not too many clumped together. You want to avoid having everything piled on top of each other because that broccoli will indeed freeze together. So try to keep it spread out. And then that is ready for the freezer. So I will save that for when we're done here. And then you guys can all come over for beef and broccoli when everything is safe to share time together. So the next trick I have, so I did make some pasta sauce. This is something, like I said, we use it for pizzas, really easy. So I've got a freezer Ziploc bag here, and I found a pan or saucepan that is tall enough and skinny enough that the bag can fit around. So I am going to put the bottom of the bag in the bottom of the saucepan, and then I'm going to open the bag so it is over the top of the saucepan. This keeps the edge of the Ziploc bag nice and clean. So I'm going to take my pasta sauce that is it's been cooling for about 30 minutes, so it's still a little bit warm, but it has cooled down slightly. So I'm going to just simply pour it into the bag here. And this trick has made my life much more simple. So I felt like I should share. They also make all sorts of gadgets for freezer meals, and they actually have a little Ziploc bag holder that you can buy. So it sits on your counter. It's got two little arms, almost like a tripod for your Ziploc bag. And you can keep the top open while you pour things in. So this is the easiest way that I have found to do soups and sauces to get them into the bag without making a complete mess. So when I get ready to put this away, I am going to make sure that all of the air is out of here, and this will help reduce the chances of freezer burn. So there are a couple ways to do that, but one of the ways is to get your bowl full of water, and you can put this bag in the water, and the weight of the product will sink to the bottom, and then the water will come up to the top of the Ziploc bag, pushing all of the air out of the bag. And that is a great way to reduce your chances of freezer burn. You also can just do it the traditional way. I know it's hard to see, but just leave a little opening here and squeeze as much air out as you can. So now I'm going to lay this nice and flat, just to make it easy to store. And then then it is ready to go in the freezer. And I will probably, because it's so flimsy, put it on a cookie sheet to put in the freezer and store. So I've got a couple more slides. So we talked about freezer burn. What do we do? So it's still safe. Freezer burn is just extra water buildup on the outside of your product. One of the best way to reduce the chances of freezer burn is to make sure that all of the air gets out of the package. The other way to do that is to reduce the amount of time that product is in your freezer. Color change, this is something we see often in the freezer. Meat, typically, if it's been in there for an extended period of time, it will turn dark or pale brown color. Your vegetables might lose their vibrance, but they're still safe to eat. Again, improving that packaging and reducing the oxygen is really how that happens. Power outages, or if the freezer fails. This is something we get a call about in extension quite often. So if the power is out, do not open the door. Keep the door closed. This will help keep that food cold. So if possible, if you have somewhere else to take that food, take it to somebody else's freezer. If your freezer is full, it will last for about 2 days and still stay safe. If it's only about halfway full, it'll last about 24 hours. Hopefully your power is not out for that long, but should it happen, always how long your food will last, and you can always call your extension office to help you out with that. And then if the freezer fails or the door is left open, for those of you with kiddos, I know this happened a lot in my household growing up. My daughter is now thinking that she is the freezer expert. It's right at her level to push closed. Sometimes it doesn't get closed. Thankfully, there's an alarm on our refrigerator to let us know it's open, but it is important to check those foods. So if ice crystals are still present, then it's safe. But if you notice that anything has completely defrosted, it's important that you discard that. And the reason for that is that you don't know how long it has been unfrozen. And that's when you have to worry about food safety. So the freezer meal starter kit. This is just a short list of all of the things you could possibly need. On the left-hand side, this is the little gadget to hold your Ziploc bag open. Super helpful. I don't have one of those. My saucepan works just fine, but a neat way to keep those bags open. Also helps with the assembly line. So the the freezer meal starter kit, always have a food thermometer, permanent markers to mark all of your labels, freezer grade plastic bags or glass jars. Glass jars are a great way to freeze foods or soups or broths. The important thing is to make sure that you give room for that food to expand when it freezes. So always leave at least 1 inch of headspace, depending on what it is you're freezing, sometimes 1.5 inches. A slow cooker or a pressure cooker, these are great ways to do kind of those dump meals, if you will. So I can take a plastic bag of chicken with some cilantro and lime and a sauce, and I can just dump it in the crock pot and leave it, set it on low, and it's ready for me when I come home. That's something easy that we can put together for the freezer. Plastic wrap, this is one of those ways to help reduce any of that oxygen in your product. Aluminum foil or aluminum foil pans. I talked a little bit about this when we were talking about if a dish can go straight from the freezer to the oven. So aluminum foil pans are a great way to do that. And if you're going to share with somebody, you don't have to worry about getting your dish back. Glass baking dishes, those are also very helpful. Lasagna is one that I really like to do as a freezer meal, but if you line the bottom with tin foil, you can actually cook the dish in the glass baking dish, and then you can freeze it, and then you can lift the foil out of the glass baking dish, and now you have your glass baking dish is free to use for another meal. Large cookie sheets, that is what I used to do my broccoli, so I'll throw that in the freezer for 30 to 45 minutes. It'll do kind of the outside will freeze, the inside will still be a little warm. And then I'll be able to use that cookie sheet for the next thing I am going to blanch. A large mixing bowl, muffin tins, those are also great things to have. Depends on what you're making, as always, but having a large mixing bowl is really important if you're going to make a lot of meals at one time. So mixing bowl, if I had to pick one thing on the list, I would get a large mixing bowl. It makes life much easier. And last but not least, and I will share these recipes, I've got them in a Word document, I just haven't gotten them over to Caitlin. But some of my favorites to make for freezer meals are soups and stews, or the broth that I talked about. Those are really easy to make once and eat twice. We made beef and barley soup not too long ago, and we had a ton left over, but the rest of it has all gone into the freezer. So I've got 2 meals out of, I ended up making once, and I will be eating it 3 times just because of how much we had left over. Enchiladas, these are a great one. I did include the recipe in the materials that I've got for you. Beef and broccoli teriyaki, ravioli lasagna. This is nice because you can use freezer or frozen ravioli. And you don't have to cook the lasagna noodles. The cheese is already in there, but it's a great freezer meal. Pesto tortellini bake, and then the cilantro lime chicken. So the cilantro lime chicken is actually, you can do it as a slow cooker meal, but you can also do it in the pressure cooker, which is always kind of fun to have those options. So those are some of my favorites. I will certainly share those with you. They will go on the Facebook page for MSU Extension Ravalli County. And I think that's all I've got. So if anybody has any questions, I am happy to answer them.
I know some people had asked some questions in the chat box, and I'm just reviewing them.
Okay. Should I stop sharing the screen?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. And I'll open, because then I'll be able to open the poll.
Okay.
So go ahead and you can take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask Katrin a question, or you can also go to the chat box and ask something there. Looks like several people just wanted some time-saving ideas. We did, I just put a question out to the chat box while we were trying to, with the technical difficulties. Some people also asked about they wanted some new ideas and what things not to do well in the freezer, and then motivation. So hopefully we covered all of those topics. And by the way, Betty thinks that your trick for the bag and sauce is a genius trick. So thank you for sharing that little tidbit today. And so from Betty, she says, Katrin, do you have any easy lists or apps to help plan?
So last week, actually, Haley Barker over in Stillwater County, she did a class like this on, it's called Meal Lime with 1 L. It's a little complicated, but it is one of my favorite apps that I have used, and they have recipes on there. They're not freezer meals, but you could certainly make them into freezer meals. And then the other app that I used is kind of a battle between my husband and I, who liked which app better. But AnyList is another app that I have used for meal planning. It's really easy to pull meals off of, or recipes off of the internet that you can switch into the app. It makes a grocery list. It keeps track of everything. And you can put your own recipes in there. You can put your own recipes into Meal Lime as well. but Mealime and AnyList are two of my favorite meal planning apps.
I also just opened the poll, so if you could respond there just to help give us feedback about the class. And Betty, that program, the Mealime meal planning, was shared in the event. If you can't find it, I'm putting my email address in there and I can send it to you directly as well. But any of the recordings, what I've done is I've placed it in a Facebook event, the same one that you found to get here today. Although I think I might have found a glitch that you can't share past events, the posts with anybody. So I know someone asked me to make the link shareable, and I don't think that it was anything that I did on my end. So I might need to share the post in a different way. Technology, right now, we're all thrown into it and having to make the decisions rather than putting it on the back burner for motivation.
Yeah. Was that motivation? Was that one of the things that somebody asked about?
Yes, it was actually Callie asked for new ideas and motivation. So the
Okay.
question for Callie is, did you find motivation, or Katrin, can you share some tips on your motivation?
It's honestly, it's a little bit of both. I kind of fluctuate. Recently we've been really doing great at meal planning, and so that has helped reduce the number of times we needed to do freezer meals. But whenever I have the opportunity to make something or make a larger batch, I always make enough to put something in the freezer. I think that's probably my biggest motivator. But also with activities that I know are coming up, I taught classes in the evening a few months ago, and so I made sure that I either had a dump crock pot meal or something that was ready to go for my husband to make when he would come home from work with our daughter. So kind of family logistics were also the motivation. It's like to get something in the freezer that's easy for somebody to just put in the oven. And I'm always looking for new ideas. So some of those recipes that I've listed are from a website I recently found. Um, there's also a book, which is the name escapes me at the moment, but there is I think it's called Not Your Mom's Freezer Meals. That's what it's called. But she's got a ton of tips and tricks, and she actually has meal plans that are listed out in her recipe book. And she has meatless meal plan and some with meat and some mixed together. I'll try and find that and I'll send it to Caitlin so you can add that to the resource list.
I was I was still muted and I was looking up that app. It looks like Not Your Mom's Meal Planning. Does that sound familiar or no? Is that what it is? You'll have to send it to me.
Just
Yeah, you'll have to send it to me. I know that I'm getting tired of the things that I usually fix because we're here in this house and we don't go out to eat now.
yeah. Okay, so it's called Mother's Make Ahead and Freeze Cookbook. I will send.
That'd be great.
Oh, I can't chat if I don't submit.
Oh, huh. What was it called? Not Your Mama's?
Not Your Mom's Freezer. It's a long title.
Okay, you'll just send it to me and I'll get it out and people can email me if you have questions.
Yes.
All right, so it looks like there's 1 minute left on, or about 30 seconds left on the poll if you haven't already completed it. And thank you for joining us today. Let me show you a couple more programs that we have. Tomorrow is a program that is taught by our health and wellness specialist, Michelle Grokey. It is Principles of Mindfulness. On Wednesday, we have Spring Clean Your Important Papers that I'm going to be teaching. It's at noon as well. On Thursday, we have Financial and Healthcare Power of Attorney taught by Marcia Getting. She's our MSU Extension Family Economics Specialist. And then on Friday is Getting Started with Your Pressure Cooker. And I am teaching that as well at noon on Monday. And then starting into next week, we have a lot of programs. One is on Cooking with Kids by Jasmine Carbajal. She's our extension agent in Hill County. And then on Wednesday, we have What's Available in Your Pantry, Carrie Krug. And probably in the next few days, we'll have Tuesday and Friday's program figured out as well. So thanks so much for being here today. And let me stop that recording.